Welcome back to our fourth lesson in our series Ever After, and today we're talking about the power of sacrifice. We're going to look at 3 sacrifices necessary to improve your marriage, to make it better and possibly even great. Now, something we should note about marriage. I think a lot of times when you get married, you kind of think everything's going to be sunshine and roses.
Yes.
Most marriages have a couple challenges.
Yes.
I love that scripture by Paul. He says in 1 Corinthians 7:28, if you do get married, it's not a sin. Well, that's good to know. However, those who get married at this time will have troubles.
Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? That is a promise out of Scripture that we're going to have troubles in our marriage.
Where do I sign up? So how do we deal with that? Every relationship has its challenges. So how do we deal with it? What kind of sacrifices can make them better? Okay. The first sacrifice we want to talk about that's critical to a better marriage is the sacrifice of conflict. Is a better marriage worth the fight it's going to take to have one? Worth the conflict it's going to take to get there? Nehemiah said this, remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. So in regard to the sacrifice of conflict, the question is a better marriage worth the fight? Apathy is the number one marriage killer. So it's going to take some conflict to get to a good marriage. But is all conflict created equal?
Definitely not. There is bad conflict that is, blame shifting, power struggles, escalating tensions that are unresolved. It doesn't resolve.
And it's based on pride.
Right.
I mean, we kind of want our way, or it's our world and I'm just letting you live in it kind of mentality.
Or I'm right and you have to agree that I'm right or we can't move forward kind of thing.
You can get stuck. Pride will get you stuck. So, bad conflict is marked by pride. So then that means that there's a good conflict that resolves tension. That's marked by maturity, where I'm able to hear my partner, humble myself enough to listen to what the other person's saying.
Right. Maturity and humility and really hearing. We talked about hearing each other's heart, and that kind of conflict where you're really listening to understand what is going on here, that will resolve things.
And so a lot of marriages run away from conflict. Some people run into it, and that may not be healthy either, depending on if tensions are getting resolved.
Right.
But your marriage is worth a fight.
It is.
God says so, and so it's worth having those conversations, opening up with each other, exposing yourselves, and risking conflict. And so that's a sacrifice. The second sacrifice is the sacrifice of responsibility. Galatians 6:5 says, we are each responsible for our own conduct.
Is a good marriage worth taking personal responsibility? We don't need to live as a victim, someone who blames other people for the relationships that they have or the condition of their lives. The way to stop being a victim is to take responsibility.
A lot of times the conflict we have in a marriage, we may actually be causing it because of our own values that were set in wounded moments, how we're reacting. Often we react to our partner in a way that's inconsistent with their actions, but is consistent with a past event.
That's true.
And so taking responsibility says, I set out to grow personally and heal.
Right. It's taking responsibility. If you do have those past wounds and judgments and vows that you've made in difficult times, it's being responsible is saying, I'm going to take responsibility for that healing. Realize a wound needs to be healed. A wound is either going to get infected or it's going to be healed. And if you're living with infected wounds, that is definitely going to impact your marriage. So take responsibility for your own healing.
That's right. Remember, a marriage is 2 broken people healed into one. So keep that in mind. So if you take responsibility for your own healing, and then step up for your partner as well.
Yes.
Your wife or your husband may need some help. And you may not be able to just come out and say, hey, you need help. That might start a nice conflict in itself.
Right.
But you can support them, pray for them, recommend things for them, go with them to things to help them heal as well.
Right. Encourage them in that and pray for them. It's so important to pray for your spouse
right.
in those specific areas.
So we've covered a sacrifice of conflict, a sacrifice of personal responsibility, and the third sacrifice that's going to be key to getting your marriage to the next level is a sacrifice of forgiveness.
Colossians 3:13 through 14 says, "Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony." So, is a good marriage worth the forgiveness that it takes?
And then I think forgiveness will take you from that better good to a great marriage. I think this is one of the superpower sacrifices that may be really difficult to comprehend and bring into your marriage, especially if you have a long history of unresolved issues. But I think it's really, really, I know it's really powerful.
Right.
And a lot of folks struggle with forgiveness, and totally understand why. Because it's honestly, it's hard to trust people. Okay,
Right.
It just is. People have let us down. Our spouses have let us down.
Right.
And when we got married, we really laid a lot of trust, probably too much, in our spouse. Really,
That's true.
I mean,
And we need to remember that forgiveness is not about trusting people, it's about trusting God.
that's right. God will take care of us no matter what happens to
right.
us. And I can trust God in my marriage. Now, again, that's not to say I should stay in an abusive situation or anything like that. Let me make that crystal clear. Personal safety is something God cares about in your life, and so don't stay in an abusive situation. But God can do so much in seemingly impossible situations, and forgiveness is one of those areas. I mean, God shows up. What's more like Jesus than forgiveness?
That's right. And forgiveness is oftentimes about just the little offenses every day, the way that you do things different than I do.
Right.
And oftentimes we'll take those little tiny things and make huge things out of them when they can just be forgiven. It's not a big deal.
That's right. So there are at least 5 major areas. I'm sure there are more areas, but 5 major ones that we struggle with in our marriage: money, career, housework, parenting, sex. There, we said it. It's one of those big conflicts that we have. And there are other things. We're not even going to talk about in-laws because we don't want to fight on camera. No, I'm just kidding. So all of those areas going to take some conflict, some personal responsibility.
Yes.
And then you're going to have to forgive each other. Right. We all react in moments less than who we really are. We overreact. We say things that we know will hurt the other partner.
That's true.
And then it's hard, even when we ask forgiveness, it's hard to let that go.
Right.
That the brain will replay the tapes.
Right.
So that's where forgiveness comes in.
Yes.
We've got to forgive each other. Ask Jesus to help us forgive each other and let things go. I'm telling you, forgiveness, this sacrifice of forgiveness, will do so much to carry your marriage from better to good to great.
Yes, and forgiveness, a lot of times people think if I forgive, I'm just letting that person off the hook. I'm just saying that it's okay what they did to me or what they said. But actually, if there wasn't an offense, if there wasn't a real hurt, then there would be no need for forgiveness. So forgiving is not saying it didn't matter. Forgiving is saying it did matter.
Right.
But I choose to forgive you. I choose to extend to you that which Christ has extended to me, and that is forgiveness.
That's right. So we want our heart is a great marriage.
Yes.
I mean, every marriage can be better. Most marriages, the vast majority can be good. And I believe that same majority can be great.
Yes.
But it's going to take some sacrifice. You got to have some conflict. Honest, loving, humble conflict. You got to take responsibility. We can't just keep that pride on and blame the other person and excuse ourselves from being engaged in our own marriage. Right. And then we need to use forgiveness to set us free, to release our marriage from the burdens and the weights of all the things that have happened before.
Right.
Thanks for doing this series with us. Christy and I have really enjoyed doing this together. I don't know that we've laughed this much in a while, so it's been fun.
It's been great.
So thanks for doing the Ever After series with us. We'll see you again soon.